Valkyrie, say fuel state! God damn it, Anya, talk to me! The voice crackled through the headset, thin and stretched over the shriek of the master caution alarm. Red lights flashed across Captain Anya Rostova's console, each pulse a frantic heartbeat. Her own breath was a ragged counterpoint in her oxygen mask, tasting of ozone and fear. Below, the Zarian desert was a canvas of fire and shadow. Fuel is critical, Sky Eye. Maybe 5 minutes of flight, she managed, her voice strained, knuckles white on the control stick. The A-10 shuddered as another piece of flak tore at its armored skin. Ground element is being overrun. They're inside the wire, Valkyrie. We are out of time. The JTAC's voice, a young sergeant named Deaad, was breaking. Command says RTB, that's an order. Anya's eyes locked onto the infrared bloom of the lead enemy tank, its cannon turning toward the small, desperate cluster of friendlies. Return to base. The order was clear. So was the image of the soldiers who would die if she obeyed. Copy that, Sky Eye, she transmitted, her voice suddenly calm, detached. Tell Deaad, tell Havoc 1 to pop smoke. I have 1 pass left. A beat of stunned silence. Captain, you don't have the fuel. Just 1 pass, she repeated, her thumb moving to the weapon release switch. Make it count. 36 hours earlier, Al-Sara Forward Operating Base, the day began with the taste of dust. It was a fine, pervasive grit that settled on everything in Al-Sara Forward Operating Base. The tongue, the teeth, the very back of the throat. Captain Anya Rostova had learned to live with it, just as she had learned to live with the oppressive RK-400 Zulu heat and the low, constant hum of generators that was the base's heartbeat. She stood before her aircraft, the Fairchild Republic A-10C Thunderbolt Jackson, call sign Valkyrie 7-1. To the uninitiated, it was an ugly machine. It lacked the sleek, predatory lines of the F-16s that shared their corner of the flight line. Its twin engines were slung high and wide, its wings stubbornly straight. It was a machine built not for elegance, but for endurance. Pilots called it the Warthog. Anya thought of it as a guardian. Its thick titanium armor was a shell, a promise of return. Her pre-flight inspection was a meticulous ritual, a silent conversation with the machine. Her gloved fingers traced the seams along the fuselage, checked the pins on the ordnance, and ran along the leading edge of the wings. The ground crew, led by a wiry staff sergeant named Chen, watched from a respectful distance. They knew her process. They knew it was sacred. The ritual was interrupted by the sharp crackle of the base-wide tannoy system. All pilots assigned to morning sortie rotation, report to Briefing Room Delta. I repeat, all pilots, Briefing Room Delta, immediately. Anya sighed, the quiet communion broken. She gave the nose of the A-10, painted, with the snarling teeth of its namesake, a final, reassuring pat before turning toward the prefabricated buildings that housed command. Briefing Room Delta was cold, the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the desert outside and the body heat of 20 pilots. At the front stood Major Thorne, the squadron's commanding officer. He was a career fighter pilot, a man who spoke the language of Mach speeds and beyond visual range engagement. He viewed the A-10 as a relic, a slow-moving plow horse in a stable of thoroughbreds. All right, settle down, Thorne began, his eyes sweeping the room. They lingered on Anya for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Annoyance? Dismissal? Intel has eyes on a small insurgent convoy moving supplies through Sector Gamma 9. Standard technicals, light resistance expected, a simple milk run. He tapped a key on his laptop, and a grainy drone image appeared on the screen. It showed 3 smudges of heat in a vast expanse of brown. We'll send a single bird to sanitize the route ahead of a ground patrol later this evening. Anya felt a familiar tension in her shoulders. A simple milk run was one of the most dangerous phrases in the military lexicon. It bred complacency. Thorne's gaze found her again. Captain Rostova, you and your warthog will take this one. Should be a good opportunity to get some flight hours in without getting the paint scratched. A few of the younger fighter pilots shared a subtle smirk. The implication was clear. This was a task for the slow mover, the airborne tractor. It wasn't a real mission. It was busy work. Anya's expression remained a mask of professional neutrality. The condescension was an old, worn coat she had learned to shed at the door. Her skill was not measured in the Mach numbers she could achieve, but in the precision of the 30mm rounds she could deliver from her GAU-8 Avenger cannon. It was measured in the lives of the soldiers on the ground, who looked up and saw not an ugly plane, but an angel of deliverance. "Understood, sir," she said, her voice even and calm. She ignored the smirks and focused on the map, memorizing the terrain grids, the potential ambush points, the emergency divert airfields. Her mind was already in the air, flying the mission, anticipating the variables. Thorne could have his sleek jets and his supersonic glory. She had a job to do. As the briefing concluded and the pilots began to file out, Thorne stopped her. "Rostova," he said, his voice lower now. "Just follow the drone feed and put some holes in some trucks. Don't get creative. We don't need a hero today." Anya met his gaze directly. "My only objective is mission success, Major. Nothing more." She turned and walked out of the cold, sterile briefing room and back into the familiar, dusty heat of the flight line. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. Her A-10 sat waiting, solid and unassuming. Chen gave her a thumbs up as she approached. "She's ready for you, Captain," he said, "fueled and armed to the teeth." "She's always ready, Sergeant," Anya replied, a small smile finally touching her lips. She began her slow ascent up the boarding ladder, the dismissive words of Major Thorne already fading, replaced by the familiar hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit. This was her world. Not the politics of the briefing room, but the cold, functional reality of the cockpit. Here, the only thing that mattered was performance. The chill of briefing room Delta was a stark contrast to the world outside, a sterile cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with atmosphere. Anya took a seat in the back row, her notebook and pen laid out with precision on the small table in front of her. The other pilots had departed, leaving only Thorne, a communications specialist, and a young airman first class from the intelligence wing, who looked barely old enough to shave. "All right, Captain, let's get this over with," Thorne said, his tone suggesting this was a formality he would rather skip. He gestured to the large screen where the same grainy MQ-9 Reaper feed was on a loop. 3 heat signatures crawling across a monochrome landscape. "Target area is grid Papa Bravo 79er. Your contact will be a JTAC, call sign Havoc 1. They'll be observing from the ridgeline to the west." Anya made a note. "Sir, does Intel have any assessment of the convoy's air defense capabilities?" Thorne let out a short, humorless laugh. "Air defense? Captain, they're insurgents in pickup trucks, not the Red Army. The most you'll face is some stray rifle fire. Don't overthink it." "With respect, sir, this region is known for the proliferation of heavy machine guns and older man-portable air defense systems. A low and slow platform like the A-10 is particularly vulnerable, she countered, her voice calm and measured. She was not being difficult. She was being thorough. Her life and the lives of the ground team depended on it. "Your paranoia is noted, Captain," Thorne said, his words sharp. He pointed a remote at the screen, and the rules of engagement appeared in stark white text. "Your ROE are simple. You are cleared to engage only on targets positively identified by Havoc-1 via laser designation. PID is mandatory, no freelance work. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Anya replied, though a knot of unease was tightening in her stomach. Thorne wasn't just dismissive, he was actively shutting down legitimate tactical questions. It felt less like confidence and more like willful ignorance. She watched the drone footage again. The three smudges. Something about their formation felt wrong, too orderly for a simple supply run, too consistent in their spacing. Her instincts, honed over 1,000 hours of flight time and countless hours studying threat assessments, were screaming at her. "Sir, could we get a clearer feed? Perhaps task the Reaper to a lower altitude for a more detailed look?" she asked. "The Reaper is tasked elsewhere after its initial pass." Thorne snapped, his patience clearly gone. "Your mission is to support Havoc-1, not to run your own intelligence operation, Rostova. Fly to the grid, talk to the man on the ground, shoot what he tells you to shoot, and come home. It doesn't get any simpler." He turned to the young intelligence airman. "Airman, do you have anything to add? Any phantom Russian tank divisions you've spotted?" The airman flushed, startled by the major's sarcasm. No, sir. The chatter analysis is consistent with low-level insurgent activity. Nothing significant." He avoided looking at Anya, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. The briefing was over. Thorne had made it clear that no further discussion would be entertained. As Anya gathered her notes, a sense of deep foreboding settled over her. She felt like she was being sent into a dark room with a blindfold on, told only not to trip over the furniture. She stood up and gave a crisp nod. "Thank you, sir." As she walked toward the exit, the young intel airman intercepted her in the hallway, glancing nervously back toward the briefing room door. He was holding a thin manila folder. "Captain," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He pushed the folder into her hands. This wasn't in the official brief. Command flagged it as insignificant. Anya opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a topographical map of Sector Gamma 9. A small area, directly on her flight path, was circled in red pencil. Next to it was a handwritten note. "Intermittent, high-gain signal bursts detected. Origin unknown. Consistent with military-grade target acquisition radar." Her blood ran cold. It wasn't insignificant. It was everything. Target acquisition radar meant sophisticated anti-aircraft systems, the kind that could swat an A-10 out of the sky like a fly. Thorne hadn't just been dismissive, he had withheld critical, life-threatening intelligence. "Why wasn't this in the brief?" she asked, her voice low and intense. "Major Thorne said it was just atmospheric interference," the airman stammered, refusing to meet her eyes. "He said not to muddy the waters with ghost signals." Anya looked from the paper to the young man's frightened face. He knew what this meant. He knew the risk he was taking by giving it to her. She folded the paper and tucked it into a pocket on her flight suit, the folder held tightly in her hand. "Thank you, Airman," she said, her voice firm. "You did the right thing." She walked away, the folder feeling as heavy as a slab of armor. The mission was no longer simple. It was a lie. and she was flying straight into it. The cockpit of the A-10 was not a place of comfort. It was a place of function. Every switch, dial, and display was designed for a purpose, worn smooth by the hands of pilots who had flown it before her. For Anya, it was the most orderly place in the world. As she settled into the surprisingly spacious seat, surrounded by what pilots called the titanium bathtub, the chaos of the base, the dust, the politics, the lies, began to recede. This was her domain. She began the startup sequence, a symphony of actions ingrained in her muscle memory. Her gloved fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the instrument panel. The flick of the battery switch brought the aircraft to life with a low hum. She initiated the auxiliary power unit, and the hum escalated into a high-pitched whine as the jet's internal systems stirred from their slumber. The heads-up display flickered on, projecting a soft green glow onto the armored glass in front of her. One by one, the systems came online. Navigation, communications, weapons. She loaded the coordinates for Sector Gamma 9, the numbers glowing ominously on her multifunction display. They felt less like a destination and more like a pre-written epitaph. She gripped the control stick and throttle, the HOTAS system feeling like a natural extension of her own arms. Here, she was not just a pilot, she was part of the machine. As she cycled through the final systems check, a yellow caution light blinked to life on the master panel. HYD press R, right hydraulic pressure. A knot of ice formed in her gut. A hydraulic failure was no small matter. It could cripple the aircraft's flight controls. She immediately began the emergency diagnostic checklist, her voice a low, steady monotone as she read the steps aloud to herself, a habit that kept her focused under pressure. Check hydraulic pressure gauges. Right system showing 0. Cycle pump switch, no change. Cross-feed valve, open. She held her breath. For a tense 5 seconds, the light remained lit. The mission, the lie, Thorn, all of it could end right here on the tarmac with a grounded aircraft. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the light extinguished. The pressure gauge for the right system flickered and jumped back to the green. A false positive. A ghost in the machine. Anya leaned back, letting out a slow, controlled breath. It was nothing, a faulty sensor, but the jolt of adrenaline had sharpened her senses to a razor's edge. The incident served as a stark reminder. In the air, there were no small problems. Every detail mattered. The voice of Staff Sergeant Chen crackled in her headset, breaking the silence. "Everything all right up there, Captain? We saw the delay." "Just a sensor ghost, Sergeant," she transmitted back, her voice betraying none of the tension she had felt moments before. "We're clear. Valkyrie is green for taxi." "Copy that, Captain. Good hunting." She received the final clearance from the tower. This was the point of no return. Her hand moved to the canopy switch. With a pneumatic hiss, the heavy plexiglass shell lowered, sealing her inside. The roar of the outside world was instantly muffled, replaced by the intimate sounds of the cockpit. The rush of oxygen through her mask, the steady hum of the avionics, the rhythmic beat of her own heart. She was alone now, encased in her armored shell, suspended between the earth and the sky. Anya nudged the throttle forward. The A-10, heavy with fuel and ordnance, began to roll, its powerful GE TF-34 engines spooling up with a guttural roar. It moved with a sense of purpose, a lumbering beast awakening. She guided it onto the main runway, the center line stretching out before her into the hazy dawn. The heat shimmering off the asphalt made the horizon dance. For a final moment, she paused at the threshold. She thought of the intel report tucked in her pocket, the warning about acquisition radar. She thought of Thorne's casual dismissal. He was wrong, dangerously wrong. But there were soldiers on a ridgeline waiting for her, trusting her. Her duty was to them. She pushed the throttles to their stops. The warthog surged forward, pinning her to her seat. The roar became a deafening crescendo. The runway markers blurred into a single white line, faster and faster, until the vibrations of the ground gave way to the buoyancy of the air. With a final, decisive pull on the stick, she lifted the nose, and the Guardian left the earth behind, climbing steeply into the hostile orange sky. The ascent from Alsara was a climb from a world of brown into a world of blue. Below, the sprawling desert flattened into a featureless map of tan and ochre, the base shrinking to a mere speck of human geometry. Up here, at 15,000 feet, Angel's 15, the sky was a deep, merciless sapphire. The sun was a brilliant, unfiltered glare off to her left. Anya flew with a practiced economy of motion, her hands resting lightly on the controls, her eyes constantly scanning the instruments, the sky, the earth. The flight to Sector Gamma 9 was scheduled to take 20 minutes. It was a time for calm, for the pilot to become one with the rhythm of the aircraft, to mentally rehearse the mission one last time. But for Anya, there was no calm. The weight of the secret intel report in her pocket felt like a physical pressure. Intermittent, high-gain signal bursts. The phrase echoed in her mind. It was the electronic equivalent of hearing a predator's growl in the dark. As she crossed the designated ingress point, she switched to the encrypted frequency assigned for communication with Havoc 1. Havoc 1, this is Valkyrie 7-1 on station. How do you read? She transmitted, her voice even. Silence. Only the faint, ever-present hiss of the radio. She waited 10 seconds. Havoc 1, this is Valkyrie. Say again, how copy? Burst of static erupted in her ears, so loud it made her flinch. It was a thick, tearing sound, not the random noise of a poor connection, but something deliberate, something manufactured, jamming. The signal bursts the airman had warned her about. Through the wall of noise, a voice, thin and frantic, punched through for a split second. Kyrie, hear me? Havoc 1, you're breaking up. Say again, Anya said, her knuckles tightening on the throttle. She began to cycle through secondary and tertiary frequencies, searching for a clearer channel. Another burst of distorted sound. Static. Heavy. There. The voice was cut off again by a roar of white noise. This was worse than she had imagined. Without clear communication, she was flying blind. She couldn't receive target coordinates, couldn't deconflict her fire with friendly positions, couldn't provide any meaningful support. She was just a noisy tourist in a very dangerous neighborhood. Her frustration with Thorne burned hot and sharp. His arrogance had sent her here completely unprepared for the electronic warfare she was now facing. She banked the A-10 into a wide, lazy orbit over the designated holding point, her eyes glued to her instruments, looking for any sign of the jamming source. Her gaze swept over the targeting pod display, but from this altitude, the ground was a hazy, indistinct canvas. She had to get closer. Havoc 1, she broadcast again, pitching her voice to be as clear and calm as possible. Valkyrie, if you can read me, key your mic twice. A pause. Then, through the static, she heard it. 2 distinct, sharp clicks. They were there. They could hear her. A wave of relief, quickly followed by renewed urgency. Copy that, Havoc 1. Understand you are in trouble. I cannot read your voice comms, attempting to find a clear frequency. As she worked the radio, A single, clear sentence suddenly sliced through the jamming, as if finding a momentary gap in the electronic interference. The voice belonged to a young man, his words laced with a terror that chilled Anya to the bone. "Valkyrie, the situation is not as reported." The clarity was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the crushing static, but the message had been delivered. Anya's mind raced. Not as reported. It confirmed everything she suspected. The orderly convoy, the jamming, Thorne's refusal to listen. It was a trap. Havoc 1 had walked into it, and she was circling helplessly above. She keyed her mic, speaking with slow deliberation, hoping the clicks and pops of her transmission would be understood even if the words were not. "Havoc 1, I am descending to get eyes on. Pop smoke on your position. I repeat, pop green smoke on your position." She pushed the stick forward, rolling the warthog into a steady descent. The vast, empty blue of the upper sky gave way to the threatening brown of the earth below. The jamming continued its assault on her senses, a constant roar in her ears. But through it all, one last garbled phrase from the ground team reached her. The words stretched and warped, but their meaning terrifyingly clear. More numerous. God, way more numerous. As the A-10 descended through 10,000 feet, the desert floor resolved from a blurry tapestry into a landscape of sharp-edged canyons, rocky outcrops, and winding wadis. The air grew thicker, hotter. The jamming in Anya's headset seemed to intensify with her proximity to the ground, a constant, malevolent hiss. She leveled off at a cautious altitude, still outside the effective range of small arms fire, and focused her attention on the targeting pod display. With practiced movements, her fingers danced over the controls on her throttle, slewing the pod's powerful camera toward the coordinates of the supposed convoy. She switched the sensor mode to forward-looking infrared, turning the sun-baked landscape into a ghostly black and white tableau where heat meant life, or in this case, death. Black-hot signatures indicated running engines and machinery. Her screen filled with them. Not 3, but more than a dozen. The smudges she had seen on the drone feed were not pickup trucks. They were the massive, angular shapes of main battle tanks. Her trained eye identified the distinctive low silhouette of T-72s, their long cannon barrels stark against the pale sand. Alongside them were the boxy hulls of BMP infantry fighting vehicles. They were arranged in a classic armored arrowhead formation, poised for a coordinated assault, and in the center of that formation, protected on all sides, was a shape that made her heart stop. It was squat, tracked, and topped with a menacing quad-barreled turret, a ZSU-23-4, the Shilka. Its radar dish was probably sweeping the sky right now, searching for her. The source of the jamming, the source of the ghost signals. It wasn't a convoy, it was a mechanized hunting party, and Havoc 1 was the bait. "Sky Eye, this is Valkyrie 7-1, urgent traffic," she transmitted, switching her radio to the command frequency, her voice a tight coil of controlled urgency. "Be advised, target in Sector Gamma 9 is not as reported. I have eyes on a full armored company. Repeat, a full armored company, including multiple T-72s, BMPs, and active AA threat, a ZSU-23-4. The response from Major Thorne was laced with disbelief and irritation. "Say again, Valkyrie? Your transmission is garbled? Did you say armored company?" "That is affirmative, Sky Eye," Anya said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "At least 12 heavy armored vehicles preparing to advance on Havoc 1's position. They are trapped." There was a pause that stretched for an eternity. Anya could picture Thorne in the command center, his face a mask of anger and denial. He had made a catastrophic intelligence failure, and she was the one delivering the news. "Reconfirm, Valkyrie." Thorn's voice came back, cold and demanding. "That is not possible. There is no enemy armor in that sector. Your sensors must be malfunctioning." Anya felt a flash of pure, white-hot fury. Malfunctioning? She was staring at a tank battalion, and he was questioning her equipment. The lives of the men on the ground were draining away with every second of his disbelief. "My sensors are fully functional, sir. The threat is real. Havoc 1 is about to be overrun." As if on cue, a new voice screamed through the radio on Havoc 1's frequency, breaking through the jamming with sheer, desperate volume. It was the JTAC, the young man whose voice she'd heard earlier. His name was Diaz. "Contact! Contact! They're firing! We are taking direct fire from enemy armor! They knew we were here! It's an ambush!" The transmission was followed by the unmistakable, terrifying sound of incoming artillery and the frantic chatter of heavy machine gun fire. The battle had begun. Thorn could deny it all he wanted, but the sounds of war do not lie. Anya banked the A-10 hard, her eyes locked on the infrared blooms of destruction erupting around the ridgeline where Havoc 1 was pinned down. She was outgunned, outmatched, and flying straight into the jaws of a dragon. And her commanding officer was telling her it was all a bad dream. The sounds of the ambush were a visceral assault. Anya could hear the sharp crack of rifle fire, the deep rhythmic thumping of a heavy machine gun, and the terrifying whistle of incoming mortar rounds, all punctuated by the desperate shouts of men fighting for their lives. The chaos was piped directly into her helmet, a private symphony of destruction. Her mission, as defined by the rulebook, was clear. She needed authorization to engage. "Sky Eye Valkyrie, Havoc 1 is engaged, taking heavy casualties. I need immediate clearance to provide close air support," she yelled into the microphone, her voice straining against the noise. Major Thorn's reply was shockingly swift and devoid of any emotion. "Negative, Valkyrie. Your orders have not changed. You are to disengage and return to base. Immediately." The word negative hung in the air, so contrary to the reality of the situation that for a moment Anya thought she had misheard. "Sir, they are being slaughtered. They will not survive without air cover. I have the targets in sight." "You are not equipped to handle that threat, Captain." Thorn's voice was like ice. "Your A-10 is a flying target for that Shilka. I will not lose a pilot and an aircraft because a ground team got themselves into a jam. That's an order, Rostova. Acknowledge it and RTB. Return to base." The letters flashed in her mind, a military acronym for abandonment. He wasn't just giving an order. He was signing their death warrants to protect his own career. Admitting the need for an A-10 now would be admitting his initial assessment was catastrophically wrong. He would rather sacrifice a dozen men on the ground than admit his own failure. The regulations were burned into her brain. Disobeying a direct order in a combat zone was one of the gravest offenses a soldier could commit. It meant the end of her career, a court-martial, prison. Everything she had worked for, every barrier she had broken as a woman in the male-dominated world of attack aviation, would be erased. Then, Diaz's voice cut through the static again, no longer a report, but a plea. "They're inside the wire. Oh God!" The transmission ended with a horrifying scream and the sharp, final sound of a gunshot. That was it. That was the breaking point. In that instant, the choice became terrifyingly simple. On one side of the scale was her career, her future, her own life. On the other were the lives of the men bleeding out on a forgotten ridgeline in Sector Gamma 9. The voice of Thorn, cold and distant, represented the rulebook. The scream of the soldier represented her duty. Anya Rostova, the disciplined officer, the pilot who had always followed the rules, ceased to exist. In her place was only Valkyrie, the guardian. Her hand moved with a surgeon's precision. She didn't hesitate. She switched her primary radio frequency away from the command channel, severing her connection to Thorn. The Major's voice, which had just been dictating her future, vanished into the ether. She was alone, accountable only to herself and the men below. She opened the channel to Havoc 1, a line now filled with the raw, unfiltered sounds of combat. "Havoc 1, this is Valkyrie," she said, her voice transformed. It was calm, cold, and absolutely lethal. There was no trace of the subordinate who had just been arguing with her commander. This was the voice of a predator. "I'm coming in." To attack the armored column head-on would be suicide. The Shilka was the queen on this deadly chessboard, and Anya knew she had to eliminate it before she could even think about the other pieces. A direct, high-altitude approach was impossible. Its radar would pick her up miles away, and its 4 23mm cannons would shred her wings before she ever got in range. She had to be smarter. She had to use the Warthog's greatest, most maligned strength, its ability to hug the earth. Her eyes scanned the topographical map on her display, cross-referencing it with the view outside. To the east of the enemy's position was a deep, winding ravine, a scar carved into the desert floor. It was her only chance. A dangerous, claustrophobic corridor, but one that could shield her from the Shilka's radar. Anya rolled the A-10 onto its side and plunged into the ravine. The world transformed from an open sky to a terrifying blur of rock and sand. The canyon walls rushed past her wingtips, so close she felt she could reach out and touch them. Flying this low, this fast, was a violent, nerve-shredding exercise that tested the limits of both pilot and machine. The aircraft bucked and shuddered in the turbulent air, demanding constant, minute corrections on the stick and rudder. Down here, she was blind, relying solely on her instruments and her memory of the terrain. The jamming ceased, blocked by the sheer mass of rock around her. The silence in her headset was almost as unnerving as the previous noise. She was completely alone. Her target was the Shilka. Her weapon of choice was a single AGM-65 Maverick, an air-to-ground missile that carried a powerful shaped-charge warhead, perfect for penetrating armor. She selected the missile, and the distinctive, monotonous growl of its seeker head filled her ears as it activated. On her screen, a small video feed from the missile's nose camera came to life, showing the rushing canyon wall. She flew the planned route from memory, counting down the seconds until the ravine would open up, exposing her to the enemy. 3, 2, 1. She pulled back hard on the stick, and the warthog clawed its way out of the canyon, roaring back into the sunlight like a beast emerging from its lair. For a split second, she was blinded by the glare. Then all hell broke loose. The moment she cleared the ridge, her entire cockpit screamed. The radar warning receiver, RWR, shrieked a high-pitched, solid tone, the sound of an active, unbroken enemy lock. A diamond-shaped symbol flashed on her display, identifying the source, the Shilka. It had found her. Its quad cannons were already slewing in her direction. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an eternity. She had seconds, maybe less, before a torrent of high-explosive shells would tear her from the sky. There was no thought, only action. The thousands of hours in the simulator, the endless drills, the muscle memory. It all took over. Her thumb slewed the targeting pod's crosshairs onto the heat signature of the Shilka. The Maverick's seeker growled louder, confirming it had a lock, a perfect, solid tone. "Fox 2!" she yelled into the void of her cockpit. The traditional call for firing an infrared missile, a primal scream of defiance. She slammed the pickle button on her control stick. The A-10 bucked as the 200-kilogram missile detached from its pylon. It shot forward, leaving a thick trail of white smoke, a javelin of vengeance hurtling across the battlefield. She didn't wait to watch. The instant the missile was away, she broke hard left, pulling punishing G's that forced the blood from her head and sent her vision gray at the edges. She deployed a cloud of chaff, tiny strips of aluminum designed to confuse the Shilka's radar, and jinked violently, making herself the most difficult target possible. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The Maverick flew true. It struck the Shilka dead center, its warhead penetrating the turret armor before detonating. The anti-aircraft vehicle erupted in a brilliant, silent flash of orange and black. Debris, metal, and fire were thrown hundreds of feet into the air. The Queen was dead. The terrible shriek in her headset ceased, replaced by the calmer, intermittent chirps of the enemy's search radars. She had survived. But as she leveled her wings, the sight below was a stark reminder that the battle had just begun. The armored column, momentarily stunned, was now beginning to scatter. Turrets were turning in her direction. An entire company of angry, heavily armed vehicles was now focused on one solitary, slow-moving target. Her. With the Shilka neutralized, the tactical geometry of the battlefield shifted. The enemy armor no longer had its protective umbrella, but they were far from defenseless. As Anya watched, the tanks and BMPs began to disperse, seeking cover behind terrain features, their commanders realizing that clustering together now made them a collective target. Their heavy machine guns, mounted on the turrets, began to spit streams of red tracers into the sky, creating a haphazard but dangerous web of anti-aircraft fire. Anya had a fleeting window of opportunity to strike before they could fully reorganize. A piecemeal attack with rockets or the cannon would be inefficient. She needed to sow chaos. She needed to remind them to be afraid of the sky. Her thumb moved to the weapons selector, highlighting the munitions she needed. The CBU-97 sensor-fused weapon. It wasn't a single bomb, but a container that dispersed multiple smart sub-munitions, each designed to hunt and kill armored vehicles. It was the perfect tool for the job. A steel rain. She climbed steeply, converting her airspeed into altitude to give the sub-munitions enough time and space to deploy properly. The tracers followed her, a swarm of angry red bees, but they fell short, their effective range far below her current height. From this new vantage point, she could see the full disposition of the enemy, and crucially, the plume of green smoke marking Havoc 1's position on the western ridgeline. They were still holding on. Havoc 1, Valkyrie. Be advised, I am commencing attack run from the north. Keep your heads down. Danger close. There was no reply, but she knew they heard. She rolled the Warthog over, pointing its ugly nose back toward the earth. The world became a grid of numbers and symbols on her heads-up display. The constantly computed impact point, a digital crosshair, drifted over the area where the enemy vehicles were most concentrated. Her dive was steep, the wind screaming over the canopy. The ground rushed up to meet her. The RWR chirped intermittently, picking up the search radars of the other vehicles, but without the Shilka, they had no way to guide missiles. They were just looking. At the precise release altitude, A tone sounded in her helmet. She pressed the pickle button. A heavy clunk resonated through the airframe as the 1,000-pound CBU-97 detached from its pylon. Her job wasn't over. She immediately pulled back on the stick, the G-forces mashing her down into her seat, and banked hard away from the target area. She had to clear the blast and fragmentation radius. Behind her, the canister burst open, deploying its payload. 10 puck-shaped submunitions, each with its own parachute, drifted down toward the battlefield. Then, their own small rockets fired, spinning them up and casting out sensor-armed projectiles. It was a complex, horrific ballet of destruction. Anya didn't see the impacts, but she felt them. A series of low-frequency thumps that vibrated through the air. On the ground, multiple enemy vehicles erupted in flames as the projectiles found their hot engines. A cheer was rising in her throat when a sudden, violent impact slammed the entire aircraft sideways. It felt less like being shot and more like being hit by a sledgehammer. A cacophony of alarms blared in the cockpit. The master caution light flashed insistently. On her engine display panel, the temperature gauge for the right engine was pegged in the red, and a bright red fire light illuminated next to it. "Engine 2 on fire! Engine 2 on fire!" The automated warning voice, a calm female announcer nicknamed Bitching Betty, stated flatly in her ear. Her training took over instantly. Right throttle to idle. Fire extinguisher switch for engine 2. Activate. Crossfeed valve. Close. She worked the emergency checklist with cold, detached precision, her heart hammering against her ribs. The fire suppression system discharged, and after a terrifying few seconds, the fire warning light blinked out. The immediate danger was over, but the cost was severe. The right engine was dead, its turbine a mangled wreck of molten metal. The A-10 was now flying on a single engine, dragging the dead weight of the other. It yawed heavily to the right, and she had to apply firm left rudder just to keep the wings level. The Guardian was wounded. Badly. But it was still flying, and below, the enemy was still fighting. Flying the Warthog on a single engine was like trying to wrestle an angry bull. The aircraft, normally so stable and forgiving, now fought her with a stubborn, unrelenting desire to roll over onto its right side. The dead weight of the ruined engine acted as an anchor, trying to drag the wing down into a death spiral. Keeping it level required constant, heavy pressure on the left rudder pedal, a physical exertion that sent a burning ache up her leg. Every gust of wind, every slight change in airspeed threatened to upset the delicate, precarious balance. Anya's world shrank to the confines of the cockpit and the struggle for control. Her breathing was a steady, rhythmic cadence in her oxygen mask, a conscious effort to keep panic at bay. Her eyes darted in a continuous loop. Airspeed indicator, attitude indicator, rudder trim, then a quick glance outside to check her position relative to the ground fire, then back to the instruments. The symphony of alarms had quieted, leaving only the steady hum of the remaining engine and the unnerving whistle of wind over the damaged nacelle. She was losing altitude, the single overworked engine unable to maintain level flight with the current drag. She had to make a decision. She could try to limp away, to climb slowly and painfully toward the relative safety of a higher altitude, and head for home. Thorne's order to RTB echoed in her memory. That was the logical choice, the sane choice. But when she looked at her targeting pod display, she saw the battle was not over. Her CBU strike had been effective, turning several vehicles into blazing pyres and throwing the enemy formation into disarray. But many remained. They were regrouping, cautiously advancing on Havoc 1's position again. Leaving now would only be a temporary reprieve for the soldiers on the ground. She would be condemning them to a slower death. As she wrestled the aircraft through a wide, shallow turn, a voice, clear and steady, cut through the low hiss of the radio. It was Diaz. "Valkyrie! Jesus, Valkyrie, are you still there? We saw the hit. We thought you were gone." The voice was filled with a raw, breathless awe. There was no panic in it now, only a profound sense of disbelief and gratitude. "You beautiful, crazy son of a bitch! You saved our asses! They were rolling right over us!" The words struck Anya with more force than the 12.7mm round had. All the tension in her shoulders, the burning in her leg, the cold fear in her gut, it all seemed to vanish, replaced by a surge of warmth. It was the voice of a man who was alive because of her. In that moment, Thorne, the court-martial, the ruined career, none of it mattered. This was the only thing that had ever mattered. The singular purpose of her existence was contained in that one grateful transmission. A smile, genuine and fierce, touched her lips for the first time that day. She keyed her microphone, her voice steady despite the strain of controlling the aircraft. "I'm still here, Havoc 1, just a little worse for wear." She felt a surge of renewed strength, a clarity of purpose that transcended the mechanical struggle. The warthog may be wounded, but its teeth were still sharp. "The party's not over yet. I've still got some gifts for them. Talk to me, Diaz. Where do you need me most?" There was a pause on the other end, and when Diaz spoke again, his voice was all business, the awe replaced with the focused cadence of a professional JTAC. He had a pilot on his side, a guardian angel who refused to fall. Hope had returned to the ridgeline. "Copy that, Valkyrie. We have what looks like their command vehicle, a T-72 with extra comms antennas, using a ruined building for cover at grid 2579R144. Take him out, and I think we can break this thing open." "Solid copy, Havoc," Anya replied, already banking the wounded bird toward the new coordinates. "Valkyrie is inbound." The command tank was cleverly positioned. It was nestled in the U-shaped remains of a bombed-out administrative building, its hull protected by thick concrete walls on 3 sides. The positioning made a Maverick missile shot nearly impossible. The missile would likely strike the protective walls before it could reach the tank itself. She still had Hydra rockets, but they lacked the precision and penetrating power needed to guarantee a kill against a modern battle tank's frontal armor. That left one option: the gun. The GAU-8 Avenger was the heart of the A-10, a 7-barreled Gatling cannon nearly the size of a small car, built to spit out 30mm armor-piercing incendiary rounds at a terrifying rate. It was a brutal, intimate weapon that required the pilot to fly low and point the entire aircraft directly at the target. It was also, in her current state, a borderline suicidal tactic. A low, straight-line pass on a single engine, with multiple enemies firing at her, was a textbook case of what not to do. Anya relayed her plan to Diaz, her voice a mask of professional calm. "Havoc 1, I'm Winchester on Mavericks. Going to attempt a gun run from the southeast. It's going to be low and loud." "Copy, Valkyrie. We'll provide what little suppression fire we can," Diaz replied, his tone grim. He knew the risk she was taking. She circled wide, using a low ridge to mask her approach as long as possible. The crippled warthog felt sluggish, unresponsive. Every maneuver was a negotiation between her, the one good engine, and the damaged airframe. She lined up her attack vector, the command tank's heat signature a glowing rectangle in the ruins on her heads-up display. Thorne's condescending voice echoed in her memory. A slow-moving plow horse. A relic. He and pilots like him saw the gun as an anachronism in an age of smart bombs and standoff missiles. They couldn't understand that sometimes the only solution was a direct, overwhelming application of brute force. Her hands tightened on the controls. She would show them what this relic could do. She pushed the nose down, coming over the ridge. Immediately, the sky lit up with tracers. They were expecting her. She ignored them. Her focus narrowed to a single point. The tank. The distance was closing fast. 3,000 feet. 2,500 feet. The targeting pipper on her HUD was perfectly aligned. Just as her thumb moved to the trigger, a new threat erupted from the right. A BMP she hadn't seen, concealed behind a pile of rubble, roared to life and opened up on her with its own autocannon. Shells stitched a line across her left wing, the impacts sounding like titanic hailstones against the fuselage. Alarms screamed anew. She had a split second to choose: abort the run and save herself, or fly through the storm to kill the king. She chose the king. She squeezed the trigger. The world dissolved into a singular, all-consuming experience of violence. The cannon did not so much fire as erupt, unleashing a sound that was not a series of shots, but a continuous, deafening roar, as if the sky itself was being torn in half. Bart! The entire aircraft vibrated so intensely that the instruments blurred, the airframe groaning in protest. The smell of cordite filled the cockpit, sharp and acrid. A torrent of depleted uranium, and high-explosive rounds, each the size of a milk bottle, streamed from the nose of her aircraft. For the 2 seconds she held the trigger down, she was a dragon breathing fire. The stream of 30mm shells struck the ruined building, not with discrete impacts, but as a focused jet of pure destruction. Concrete vaporized. Rebar twisted into spaghetti. The rounds walked from the protective wall directly onto the tank itself. The T-72's thick turret armor, designed to withstand anti-tank munitions, offered no defense. It was like hitting steel with a high-pressure water jet made of lightning. The armor peeled away, white-hot, and the incendiary rounds poured into the tank's interior. Anya pulled back on the stick with all her might, the wounded plane groaning as she demanded it climb away from the ground and the vengeful fire of the BMP. She banked hard, looking back at her target. The T-72 command tank was no longer there. In its place was a geyser of fire and black smoke, its ammunition cooking off in a series of secondary explosions that ripped the vehicle apart from the inside out. The head of the snake had been severed. The destruction of the command tank sent a shockwave of confusion through the remaining enemy forces. For a precious minute, their rate of fire slackened as they struggled to reorganize without leadership. It was the opening Havoc 1 needed. Anya saw their tiny infrared signatures begin to pull back from the ridgeline, moving west toward a more defensible position. But the reprieve was short-lived. The remaining 2 BMPs and a handful of other vehicles realized what was happening and shifted their fire, attempting to cut off the retreat. The soldiers were caught in the open. "Valkyrie, we're pinned down." Diaz's voice was strained. "They've got us in a crossfire." Anya instinctively rolled the A-10 to line up another attack, but her hands froze as her eyes scanned the weapons display. The indicators for her Maverick and CBU pylons were dark. The rocket pods were empty. A single, stark white word glowed on her main display: Winchester. She was out of bombs and missiles. She checked the counter for the GAU-8. Ammo, 188 to. Less than a 3-second burst left. Below that, another indicator blinked in insistent, angry red. Fuel critical. The gauges estimated she had perhaps 10 minutes of flight time left, and that was if she flew straight and level on her single damaged engine. A high-G combat maneuver would slash that time in half. She was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. A crippled, toothless ghost circling a battlefield where her friends were about to die. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her for the first time. She had thrown everything she had at them, and it still wasn't enough. As if the situation weren't impossible enough. A new voice, laced with fury, erupted in her helmet. It was Major Thorne, somehow back on her frequency. "Valkyrie, what in God's name is your status? I have been ordering you to RTB for the last 10 minutes. What is going on?" Anya didn't even have the energy to be angry. She simply ignored him. Her entire being focused on the tactical problem she could not solve. The men on the ground. The tracers kicking up dust around them. The 108 rounds she had left. The single-digit minutes of fuel. It was an equation with no solution. Any move she made would lead to failure. If she used her last cannon rounds, she'd have nothing left to deter the enemy. If she tried to fly home, Havoc 1 would be wiped out. If she stayed, she'd run out of fuel and crash. Then, a desperate, insane idea began to form. It was a terrible idea, a violation of every survival instinct she possessed. But it was the only idea. They weren't just shooting at a generic aircraft. They were shooting at her. The wounded beast that had torn their leader apart. She was their focus, their obsession. She could use that. She keyed the mic to Havoc 1's channel, her voice betraying none of the cold dread she felt. "Havoc 1, I'm going to make a decoy run. I'll fly low over the ridge to your east. It should draw their fire. When they engage me, you pull back to the west. Do you copy?" There was a moment of stunned silence from the ground. Diaz understood immediately what she was proposing. She was offering herself as bait. "Valkyrie, negative," Diaz said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do not do that. You won't make it." "It's the only way, Sergeant," Anya said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The decision was made. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. She would save her last few rounds for the moment of truth. "Get your men ready to move. Valkyrie is going in." She ignored Diaz's protests and Thorne's continuing enraged shouts on the command channel. She turned the wounded A-10, its one good engine screaming in protest, and aimed it not at an enemy, but at a patch of empty sky that would put her directly in the crosshairs of every gun left on the battlefield. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into a distinct, crystal-clear moment. The frantic shouts of Diaz and Thorne faded into a distant buzz, like voices from another world. In the focused, hyper-aware reality of the cockpit, there was only the mission. The remaining enemy vehicles, 2 BMPs that had become her personal tormentors, were concentrating their fire on Havoc 1's escape route. To save them, she had to become a target they could not ignore. She lowered the nose of the Warthog, not diving on an enemy, but flying a low, straight, and suicidally predictable path directly between the 2 armored vehicles. It was a flight path designed to scream, "Here I am. Come and get me." They obliged. The air around her ignited. Tracers from both BMPs converged on her position, a lattice of incandescent red lines filling her windscreen. The sound was no longer individual impacts, but a continuous, deafening roar as hundreds of rounds tore at the aircraft. Her titanium bathtub was earning its name, deflecting round after round, but the rest of the plane was being systematically shredded. Warning lights flashed across her console in a dizzying, frantic strobe effect, each one signaling the death of another subsystem. Flight hydraulics, navigation, backup power. Her fuel gauge was no longer blinking. It was a solid, ominous red. The digital readout showed fuel. 2 minutes. It was a lifetime. Through the storm of steel and fire, she saw it. Havoc won. They were moving, sprinting from cover to cover, using the precious seconds she was buying them with her own blood and titanium. They were going to make it. A fierce, quiet pride swelled in her chest. This was worth it. Her path was taking her directly toward the lead BMP. She was close now, so close she could see the muzzle flashes of its cannon with terrifying clarity. Her thumb rested on the trigger. She had 188 rounds. She had to make them count. This was not about destroying them anymore. It was about making them duck. A voice crackled in her ear, a ghost from 30 minutes ago, a moment replayed now at the apex of its meaning. It was Sky Yai. It was Thorn. Or maybe it was just her memory of him. Command says RTB, that's an order. She looked at the soldiers running for their lives below. She looked at the wall of fire in front of her. Copy that, Sky Eye, she whispered to no one. The words lost in the roar. Her voice was utterly calm, detached, as if she were an observer to her own fate. A strange peace had settled over her. The fear was gone, burned away by the purity of her purpose. I have one pass left. She pushed the throttle of her single, straining engine to its absolute limit, aiming the nose of her dying aircraft at the heart of the storm. The BMP grew larger in her windscreen. It was now or never. Her thumb depressed the trigger. The response was not the thunderous, sustained roar of before, but a short, sharp, desperate cough. Bert! A 1-second burst, a final defiant snarl from the warthog. She saw the rounds strike the ground in front of the BMP, a fountain of earth and rock that forced the gunner to flinch, to cease firing for a vital second. It was all the time Havoc 1 needed. It was all the time she had left. The moment she fired, a shell from the second BMP struck the front of her aircraft. There was a brilliant, blinding flash of white light, the smell of ozone, and then darkness. Every screen in her cockpit went black. Every light died. The reassuring hum of the avionics, the voice of bitching Betty, the roar of the last engine, all of it ceased. There was only a sudden, terrifying silence, the rush of the wind, and the undeniable feeling of falling. The silence was the most terrifying thing. For the past hour, Anya's world had been a cacophony of engine roar, radio chatter, weapons fire, and shrill alarms. Now there was nothing. Only the rush of wind and the sickening, weightless lurch of a dead fall. The A-10 was no longer an aircraft. It was a 20-ton coffin plummeting toward the desert floor. In the pitch-black cockpit, lit only by the faint glow of the distant fires on the ground, instinct took over. Her hands, guided by pure muscle memory, flew to the yellow and black striped handles at the sides of her seat. The ejection handles. The aircraft was in a steep, uncontrolled dive. The nose was dropping, and it was starting to roll. She knew she had only seconds before the angle became too severe, before the G-forces would pin her to the seat, making it impossible to pull the handles. Her mind was a void, empty of thought, empty of fear. There was only a single primal command: get out. She gripped the handles and pulled. The sequence was a masterpiece of violent, controlled engineering, explosive bolts fired, jettisoning the canopy into the slipstream. A fraction of a second later, the rocket motor beneath her seat ignited with a deafening bang, kicking her with the force of a cannonball. The acceleration was brutal, crushing the air from her lungs and momentarily blurring her vision into a gray tunnel. She was shot clear of the dying aircraft and into the cold, thin air. The rocket motor burned out, and for a terrifying moment, she was just a rag doll tumbling through the sky. Then, another explosive charge fired, deploying the drogue chute, which violently stabilized her trajectory. Finally, the main parachute deployed with a crack like a rifle shot, yanking her upright with a jolt that radiated through every bone in her body. And then, silence again. A profound, ringing silence that was deeper and more complete than the one in the cockpit. The wind was no longer a roar, but a gentle whisper past her helmet. The sounds of the battle below were faint, distant pops, like fireworks far away. She was suspended between the chaos of the earth and the infinite peace of the stars, which were just beginning to appear in the darkening twilight sky. She looked down. Her A-10, her Warthog, her Guardian was falling away from her. It tumbled end over end, a broken, silent shape, trailing a thin line of black smoke. It had absorbed a truly staggering amount of punishment, and in the end, it had held together just long enough to get her out. She watched it descend, a profound, aching sense of loss gripping her. It wasn't just a machine, it was a partner. She had failed to bring it home. It struck the desert floor with a flash of light, followed seconds later by a low, percussive boom that rolled across the landscape. A new fire bloomed in the darkness, a funeral pyre for a fallen warrior. Her own descent was swift. The ground, which had seemed so distant, rushed up with alarming speed. She tried to perform a proper parachute landing fall, but her focus was shattered. She hit the ground hard. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up from her left ankle. She cried out, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert. She lay there for a long moment, gasping for breath, the parachute silk settling around her like a shroud. The automatic emergency locator beacon on her survival vest was already emitting a steady, silent pulse, but rescue was hours away, at best. Anya pushed herself up, gritting her teeth against the agony in her ankle. It was sprained, maybe broken. She was alone, injured, deep inside enemy territory. The silence of the desert night pressed in on her, vast and indifferent. The battle was over. Her own war for survival had just begun. The night was long and cold. Anya managed to drag herself to the partial cover of a rocky outcrop, her sprained ankle a throbbing beacon of pain. She drank sparingly from her survival kit's water pouch, listening to the sounds of the desert, every gust of wind sounding like approaching footsteps. She didn't know if Havoc 1 had made it out. She didn't know if her sacrifice had meant anything. She simply waited. Just before dawn, she heard it, the faint, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter blades. A combat search and rescue team. A Pedro flight. She activated her signal flare, and a brilliant red light painted the desolate landscape. Within minutes, 2 Pavehawk helicopters were circling overhead, and a pararescueman was rappelling down to her position. The relief was so overwhelming, it was almost painful. Her return to Al-Sara was a blur of activity. Medics attended to her ankle. Intelligence officers conducted a preliminary debrief about her, evasion and rescue. And through it all, she moved in a state of detached exhaustion. She answered their questions with clipped, factual responses, offering no emotion, no justification. The full report, she knew, would come later. The real debrief, the one with Thorne. She was escorted to his office late that afternoon. Her ankle was tightly wrapped, and she walked with a pronounced limp. The base felt different now, or maybe she was the one who had changed. The pilots she passed averted their eyes. News, she knew, traveled fast. The story was already out. Rostova lost an aircraft disobeying a direct order. Thorne's office was as cold and sterile as she remembered. He sat behind his large metal desk, his face an unreadable mask of authority. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Captain," he began, his voice flat, "you are officially grounded, pending a full flight evaluation board and a UCMJ investigation for dereliction of duty and failure to obey a lawful order. The loss of a $20 million asset is not something command takes lightly. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Anya met his gaze. She felt no anger, no fear, only a profound weariness. She had made her choice in the sky over Sector Gamma 9. The consequences, whatever they were, would come. She was ready to accept them. "No, sir," she said quietly. Before Thorne could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. It opened without waiting for a reply. Staff Sergeant Diaz stood in the doorway. Behind him were 3 other soldiers from his team. They were bruised, grimy, still wearing the same uniforms they'd fought in, but they stood tall. Diaz's eyes found Anya first, and he gave a slow, respectful nod. Then his gaze shifted to Thorne, and it was as hard as iron. "Sir," Diaz said, his voice raspy. He stepped forward, uninvited, and placed a heavy, twisted piece of metal on Thorne's perfectly organized desk. It was scorched black, its edges jagged. It was clearly a piece of armor plating from a tank. Thorne stared at the object as if it were a venomous snake. "What is the meaning of this, Sergeant?" "That's a piece of the T-72 that was coordinating the attack on my men, sir," Diaz said, his voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. "The one Captain Rostova destroyed with her cannon after you ordered her to abandon us. The official after-action report will state that Havoc 1 survived due to a sudden and inexplicable collapse in enemy command and control." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "But my men and I know the truth. The only reason we are standing here is because that pilot, in that aircraft you called a relic, refused to leave us to die. We owe her our lives." Anya never took her eyes off the soldiers. She saw the truth Diaz spoke reflected in their faces. There was no protocol, no rank, no regulation in their gaze. There was only a raw, profound respect, a bond forged in fire and terror. It was all the vindication she would ever need. Thorne was silent. He looked from the piece of armor on his desk to the unwavering stare of the enlisted men, to the quiet, dignified woman sitting before him. For the first time since she had known him, Major Thorne looked utterly and completely defeated. There was nothing he could say. The living, breathing proof of his failure was standing in his office, refusing to be ignored. The days that followed were a strange sort of purgatory. Anya was confined to the base, her flight status revoked, her name now synonymous with a quiet controversy that everyone knew about but no one spoke of openly. The official investigation was a slow-moving machine of paperwork and formal interviews. She knew how it would end. The final report would be a work of fiction, citing catastrophic mechanical failure as the cause of the A-10's loss during a routine reconnaissance flight. Major Thorne's career would be protected. The intelligence failure would be buried. Her act of defiance would be erased from history. She was offered a transfer to a desk job, a quiet and face-saving exit from the cockpit. It was a comfortable prison, a way for the system to make her disappear without the messiness of a court-martial that, thanks to the testimony of Havoc 1, they would almost certainly lose. She hadn't given them her answer yet. She found herself drawn to the flight line each evening, a place that was once her sanctuary and was now a painful reminder of what she had lost. She would stand by the perimeter fence, leaning on a crutch, her wrapped ankle a constant reminder of the fall. She would watch the ground crews tend to the other warthogs, their familiar, ugly shapes silhouetted against the spectacular desert sunset. On one such evening, she stood watching as a maintenance team finished loading ordnance onto an A-10 prepped for a night mission. The smell of jet fuel, a scent she had always associated with purpose and belonging, now felt like a perfume from a past life. A young captain, a pilot she recognized from Thorne's briefings but had never spoken to, was walking toward the aircraft to begin his pre-flight inspection. He was one of the fighter pilots, the ones who had smirked at her and her slow mover. He saw her standing by the fence and his path wavered. For a moment, she thought he would ignore her, another officer shying away from the pariah. Instead, he changed his course and walked directly toward her. He stopped a few feet away, the setting sun casting a long shadow behind him. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there for a moment, looked her in the eye, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a nod of understanding, of respect. In that simple, silent acknowledgement, Anya understood everything. Her story would not be told in official commendations or recorded in the annals of the Air Force. There would be no medal pinned to her chest, no promotion ceremony, no laudatory speeches. Her legacy was written elsewhere. It was written in the lives of the men of Havoc 1. It was present in the quiet gratitude of Sergeant Diaz. And it was here, in this silent nod from a fellow pilot who had once dismissed her but now understood the true meaning of her job. The story of Valkyrie 7-1 would be a whisper in the ready rooms, a legend told over beers in dusty NCO clubs, a piece of unofficial history known only to those who were there and those who heard the truth. Anya returned the nod, a faint, peaceful smile touching her lips. That was enough. It was more than enough. She turned away from the fence, away from the flight line, away from the life she was leaving behind. Her limp was steady, her posture upright. She didn't need the sky anymore. She had found what she was looking for on the ground. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a guardian, and her duty was done. 3 years later, the dust of Alsara was a distant memory, replaced by the damp, clean scent of pine and wet earth. The world was no longer a monochrome palette of brown and tan, but a deep, vibrant green. Anya Rostova lived in a small wood-frame house nestled in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, a place where the sky was more often a soft, pearlescent gray than a harsh, brilliant blue. She had taken the desk job just for a year, a bureaucratic purgatory she endured out of a final, lingering sense of duty. Then, with no ceremony, she had honorably discharged herself from the United States Air Force. The investigation had concluded as she'd known it would. A footnote in a file, a story officially untold. Thorne was promoted and transferred. The system had protected itself. Anya, however, had found a different kind of flight. She flew a de Havilland Beaver, a rugged single-engine floatplane for the U.S. Forest Service. Instead of scanning the ground for armored threats, she now scanned the endless expanse of evergreen canopy for the first faint wisps of smoke that signaled a wildfire. She was still a guardian, but her charges were now ancient forests and the small communities that lived among them. The limp from her ankle was a permanent companion, a quiet physical reminder of the price of that transformation. One rainy Tuesday afternoon in October, a small padded envelope arrived with her mail. It had no return address, only a postmark from San Antonio, Texas. She sat at her simple wooden kitchen table, the rain drumming a gentle rhythm on the metal roof, and carefully cut it open. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten letter. The photo showed a group of men, smiling, at a backyard barbecue. She recognized them immediately, though they were older now, heavier, softened by civilian life. The men of Havoc 1. In the center, holding a laughing toddler on his shoulders, was Diaz. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, disciplined. "Captain," it began. "I hope this letter finds you. It took some doing to track down a mailing address. They don't make it easy for people like us to find people like you. I wanted you to see this. This is all of us last summer. Every single man from that ridgeline made it home. A few of us are still in, but most of us are out now. We have wives, kids, mortgages, normal lives, the kind of lives that didn't seem possible that day in Gamma 9. The official story is just that, a story, but we tell the real one. My daughter, the one in the picture, her name is Anya. My wife thinks it's a beautiful name. I told her it was the name of an angel who flew a warthog. We never knew what happened to you after that day, officially. We just heard you left. I hope you found peace. I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It wasn't erased. It lives on with us. It lives on in my daughter's name. You showed us what a hero was, the kind that doesn't need a medal to prove it. Thank you, Valkyrie." Diaz. Anya read the letter twice, her vision blurring. She looked at the photograph, at the smiling faces, at the little girl with her father's eyes perched on the shoulders of a man who was alive because of a choice she had made in a falling, burning machine. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness or loss. It was a tear of profound, quiet peace. The last ghost of Alsara had finally been laid to rest. Her sacrifice had not been a secret. It had been a seed, planted in the desert and now blossoming in homes and families a world away. She folded the letter and placed it, along with the photo, on the windowsill. She looked out at the rain-soaked trees, at the low-hanging clouds clinging to the mountainside. Her radio, tuned to the Forest Service frequency, sat on the counter, silent for now. She was on watch. She was home.